Day 2, Edinburgh to johnO'Groats. I had actually slept well and woke up to a really cold room. I could hear the rain and I suspected this was going to be a bit of a cold and wet riding day. I checked the weather app. Yellow weather warnings all the way up. Heavy rain, ice, strong winds for the next 2 days. I told Pooley, but we were quite adamant that we had to do it. We had a room that night booked at johnO'Groats and there was no room in the inn for that night. As we loaded up, we got drenched even before we left. It should have been a warning, but we were on a timetable. 300 miles to go, and according to Google, over 6 hours of constant riding, and we did not have time to mess about. But first things first, we needed a Gerald Vince style stop in a magazine for fags, booze and candy. Oh yes, and fuel too. I stocked up on meal deals at the petrol station and we got moving after another delayed start. I'm not sure where after Edinburgh, but we crossed the Forth Bridge. There was a real sense of change at this point in the landscape, the road. It went from the metropolitan feel of Edinburgh, and there was a slow step back in time to more of a rural countryside feel. A good hour and a half in, we stopped at a service station called Taste of Persia on the A9 for a break and a breakfast. When we sat down, I don't think the staff were too happy. As we walked in more drenched than we had realised, a pool of water started to form around our table. As we started to dry out, we just soaked the chairs, the tables and everything around us. I felt so embarrassed, but I needed to be warm and that was my priority. So I just smiled sheepishly back at the tutting around us. After a much needed feed and Pooley's obligatory cappuccinos and my first refusal to have an ice cream, we finally had some feeling back in our fingers and we were ready to continue. As we rode on, the words of the nice lady at the restaurant rang in my ears, speaking to us both. What are you doing? I can't believe that you're riding in this weather. And if I was your wife, I would be going crazy with worry. Why are you doing this? To let you know how bad it was when we left Edinburgh, I'd seen yellow weather warnings had been issued in Inverness. When I checked again, I believe they were amber for the rest of the route. This comment really stuck on my head, and I'd taken it seriously and wanted to know the answer too. In short, I'd whittled it down to a few things. Firstly, it was unfinished business. This Land's End to johnO'Groats trip. It was just like Mastermind. I've started, so I'll finish. But it was actually more than that. I've been wanting to do this for so long, and the more challenges one faces when against it, the sweeter the victory. I grinned as the rain came down lashing and dribbled around the inside of my visor. We got ourselves down the road and I'd started to adjust my bag again. It was the bane of my existence on this trip and a constant stress. I will never travel with it again, and now I'm not going to mention it again either. We put our heads down and focused on the trip. We did stop at a service station and a nice restaurant at some point, but I don't remember where. We took over an hour's stop to rest and eat and dry out as much as possible. I had asked my instructor Jim for any advice before I'd left to Cornwall, and he simply said a few pair of gloves so you can change them out. To give you an idea of how wet it was, I had changed out all 3 pairs of my gloves by the time we stopped for breakfast, and now they were all sodden. After another much needed stop and break, we were ready to move on, and we left the bikes to warm up and sheltered under a corner to avoid the weather as long as we could. Next stop Inverness, and I needed fuel. Overall, the journey was quite beautiful, yet mostly uneventful, apart from an accident at some point before Dalwhinnie. We did pop into Dalwhinnie petrol station for fuel, but they only offered E10, and the attendant didn't look too happy to see a pair of wet, sodden through bikers try to walk into his shop. Inverness to johnO'Groats. Well, we got to Inverness, also known as the Black Isle, and I felt miserable. The wind had left me with neck pains from the buffeting, and I'd started to get some rain going up my arms, and I felt, well, yuck. We went around a few roundabouts looking for a petrol station, and we stopped at one that was quite busy and didn't have a suitable shelter to stop and have a real rest. So we jammed ourselves in the front of the petrol station, got some sandwiches, and also remember that we got some looks from those filling up the station. Oh my god, what have I done? We soon got on our way. Inverness had quite a different feel to the places until this point. The crossing at Keswick Bridge also did feel like we're entering a new land or a very different part of Scotland. I suppose it makes sense, as it's called the cultural capital of the Highlands, and crossing off the bridge did leave me with a sense of grand entrance to a new world. But we were late again. We were only halfway there, and we had too many stops faffing around, and had delayed us again. I got the sense Pooley would not want to tour with me again until I got my anti-faffing certification. Until Helmsdale, the weather had progressively got worse, and whilst in between gaps there was some stunning roads, it was the wind that was particularly exhausting. Rain started to hit me in the face near vertical. Despite the cold, the cramp and the wetness soaking through, we remained in good spirits and kept laughing with a constant ooh and ah, look at the sky. All of this changed at Wick. I've actually just been speaking to Pooley to talk about our trip, and he very clearly remembered the rain like bullets at this point, and it was painful and it was so heavy that it soaked him through, but also the inside of his visor. I'd actually had quite a similar experience. I just purchased a new Oxford jacket and trousers in the hinterland, and I truly believe this change from my previous jacket had made all the difference. More as I actually made a mistake at this stage. Going through Wick, I opened my visor to see better as we negotiated the streets, where in doing so totally drenched my face and inner padding on my helmet. This resulted in a very heavy fogging of my visor, and I couldn't see a thing, so I had to keep my visor open from this point onwards. It was pitch black at this point. The rain was like ice hitting my face like needles, sapping away any warmth and strength that I had. I was so angry with myself. I'd gotten myself into another dodgy situation like Cornwall, and if that wasn't bad enough, I now dragged my mate into my shenanigans. But it was only 17 miles and 25 minutes away according to the GPS. It actually took an hour, and the worst part was that the locals who were rushing around who knew the roads, were used to the weather, were zooming dangerously past us. I kept laughing with Pooley that it would be like only a few more minutes on a new bike just passed last week, and now you're doing this. I'd made similar trips in the past in worse conditions 20 years ago, as I'd just been taught a bit of a lesson. I was 45 odd, overweight, out of shape, and dreaming of better days, realising that wasn't me today. I was genuinely worried that the coastal roads that we were passing, a gust of wind on those icy roads could mean the end of us. Well, more likely me. Pooley's an excellent rider. I kept on pushing Pooley through, making a few dad jokes and a few of that's what she said thrown into the conversations. Both laughed. I didn't know how we got through, but when we reached at 7 p.m, that I saw the sign for the Seaview Hotel, I wheezed in triumph. We had helped each other get through, and we were finally there. We'd made it. I parked up and couldn't get my leg over. Well, it wasn't the first time, it wasn't going to be the last. Pooley stayed outside to look after the bikes and stop the mighty DeVille from keeling over. I hobbled into reception and rang the bell. As I lifted my lid, my teeth were chattering, and I wasn't able to form a sentence, and I just stood there, dripping, making a mess, at reception, with the receptionist just staring at me. I raised my little finger, blathering out 1 sec, opened my app with the reservation and put it in front of her. Ah, I see. She started to fill out forms and ask questions. I just nodded a lot and asked where I could put the bikes.
Lovely.
Two days done. Just 2 days left to go. We're halfway through, really. But we do need to have more ice cream. That is one of my complaints so far. Hopefully we'll try and remedy that today. So anyway, the weather was so bad. It was so dark. It was so cold. I think without the heated grips, I mean even with the heated grips actually, I think I really could have hurt my fingers. I think Pooley went so lucky. So he came back. He did have some pressure points forming. Oh, how is that, Pooley?
What's up?
How's your hands?
Sore. No blisters though.
Oh, there we go. That's good. So they're still sore. I think I've come out quite reasonably lucky with this, and I think it's because the Transup's a really comfortable bike. You're riding along, and someone comes along and just pushes you. That's how it was. I literally on my chest could feel the wind was doing that, and it was really bizarre because you know that no one's there, and you can see that no one's there. But you can feel this like almost padding on your chest, pounding on your chest and around your body, and suddenly as soon as you're going this way a bit, the wind will get you from the back, and so you're struggling to keep yourself upright, and that was difficult. But then even what made it even worse was having these really difficult roads. That when there were cliffs on one side, there were drops on the other side. There were really tight bends, so I had to really keep my speed low just to keep myself upright. In that part between Wick, the temperature dropped so low. It was like having needles of ice just hit your face every time you lifted it up, and you could feel it, and it was just draining. But then after Wick, I had to leave my visor open, so I drove that distance, and it just totally just sucked any warmth I had in my body out. We had made it through, and it was time for a celebration. I headed to the bar to celebrate and got a few pints lined up for Pooley. We ordered a feast. Well, people say that Scotland is quite an expensive place, but £85 bill had left us both of us checking it. More importantly, we were both left recharged with a sense of victory and achievement. Not only had we done it in October through various weather warnings, heavy rain, ice, wind, we'd finally earned our pint and ticked our box with bells on. End of part 3.